The rain freezing on her skin felt like needles, but it was nothing compared to the betrayal burning in her chest. Hunted, bleeding, and out of time, she dragged herself to the heavy mahogany door. When it opened, revealing immortal eyes, she whispered, "I have nowhere left to go." The October wind whipping off Lake Michigan was brutal, carrying with it the promise of a harsh Chicago winter. But for Clara Hayes, the cold was the least of her concerns. She was running for her life, her bare feet slapped against the freezing, wet asphalt of the alleyway behind Lower Wacker Drive. Her breath came in jagged, misty gasps, and her left hand was pressed desperately against her ribs, where a dark, warm stain was rapidly spreading through her torn cotton sweater. She didn't dare look back. If she looked back, she would see the shadows moving. She would see the men her fiancé had sold her to. Just 3 hours ago, Clara had been sitting in her warm, brightly lit apartment on Oak Street, drinking tea and finalizing the guest list for her upcoming wedding to Liam Gallagher. Liam, the charming, successful private equities manager she had loved for 3 years. Liam, who had come home early, not with a kiss and a smile, but with 3 men dressed in tactical gear from a private contractor group known only in whispers as the St. Jude Syndicate. Clara had hidden in the hallway, paralyzed by confusion and terror, as she listened to the man she was supposed to marry negotiate the price of her life. "Her bloodline is confirmed," Liam had said, his voice as casual as if he were ordering a coffee. "She's the last living descendant of the Rousseau line. Just make sure the extraction is clean. I don't want my neighbors calling the Chicago police." When they moved in to take her, Clara fought like a cornered animal. She had smashed a heavy crystal vase over the head of the closest man, taking a grazing knife wound to her side in the ensuing chaos, and threw herself out of the second-story fire escape window. Since then, it had been a blind, agonizing sprint through the underbelly of the city. She was losing too much blood. The neon signs of the downtown bars blurred into streaks of garish color. Her mind began to fragment, pulling up an old, seemingly insane urban legend her grandfather used to mutter about when his dementia was at its worst. He used to talk about the king of the Undercity, a creature of immense, terrifying power who lived disguised as a reclusive billionaire on Astor Street. "If the wolves ever come for you, Clara," her grandfather had croaked from his hospice bed at Northwestern Memorial, "you go to the Croft residence. You bleed on his steps. It is the only sanctuary." Clara had thought it was the rambling of a dying mind. Now, with the sound of heavy combat boots echoing against the wet brick walls behind her, it was her only hope. She forced her burning legs to carry her north, stumbling through the wealthy, quiet neighborhood of the Gold Coast. The historic mansions loomed over her like silent judges. Finally, she saw it. An imposing 4-story grey-stone townhouse surrounded by a wrought-iron fence. There were no lights on inside, but the air around the property felt unnaturally heavy, practically vibrating with a latent, unseen energy. Clara collapsed against the iron gate. To her shock, the latch clicked open beneath her trembling, blood-slicked fingers. She crawled up the stone pathway, her vision tunneling into darkness. The sound of her pursuers was getting closer. She could hear the crackle of a police scanner from one of their radios. They were closing the net. With the last ounce of her fading strength, Clara dragged her upper body up the final 2 stone steps and slammed her bloody palm against the massive, dark mahogany door. "Please," she choked out, her voice barely a rasp. "Please." The silence of the night was deafening. She slumped against the wood, the cold stone freezing her legs. She was going to die here. Liam had won. Then the heavy lock turned with a resounding clack. The door swung open inwards, and Clara fell forward, caught instantly by a pair of impossibly cold, strong hands. She gasped, struggling weakly, but the grip was absolute. She forced her heavy eyelids open and looked up. Standing above her was a man who looked like he had been carved from marble and shadow. He wore a crisp, dark, tailored suit that spoke of immense wealth, but his face was what made Clara's breath hitch. He was terrifyingly beautiful, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of a stormy sea. But it was the subtle, predatory stillness of his posture, and the faint, elongated sharpness of his canines that confirmed her grandfather's insane stories. This was Adrian Croft, the king. Adrian looked down at the bleeding, broken woman in his arms. His gaze flicked to the street, his heightened senses catching the sound of the St. Jude mercenaries approaching the perimeter of his property. His jaw tightened, a flash of pure, violent irritation crossing his immortal features. He looked back down at Clara. Her face was deathly pale, her lips blue from the cold. She reached up, her trembling fingers leaving a smear of red blood on the lapel of his immaculate suit. She didn't ask for the police. She didn't scream. She just stared into his ancient, dangerous eyes. "I have nowhere left to go," she whispered, a single tear cutting through the rain and grime on her cheek. Adrian stared at her for a fraction of a second. He could smell the Rousseau blood, an ancient lineage that had been lost to the vampire world for a century. He knew exactly what was hunting her, and he knew exactly what taking her in would mean. It meant war. His arms tightened around her, lifting her effortlessly against his chest. "Come home," Adrian murmured, his voice a dark, velvet rumble that vibrated through her very bones. He stepped back into the shadows of the foyer and kicked the heavy mahogany door shut, the lock sliding into place with a definitive, ringing finality, just as the first mercenary stepped onto the pavement outside. Clara's eyes rolled back, and she finally let the darkness take her. When Clara opened her eyes, there was no rain, no cold, and no blood. She blinked against the soft, warm light of a crackling fireplace. She was lying in the center of a massive, four-poster bed, draped in heavy silk and crushed velvet. The room smelled of old paper, expensive cedar, and something faintly metallic. Panic flared in her chest, and she bolted upright. A sharp ache pulled at her side, but the agonizing pain was gone. She looked down. She was no longer wearing her ruined, bloody clothes. Instead, she was dressed in a soft, oversized cashmere shirt. She tentatively lifted the hem and gasped. The deep knife wound on her ribs had been stitched with surgical precision, covered by a sterile medical dressing. "You should not move so quickly. Your human body has lost roughly 2 pints of blood, and despite my doctor's best efforts, you are still on the verge of hypovolemic shock." Clara froze. The voice came from the shadows in the corner of the sprawling room. Adrian Croft stepped into the firelight. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie, wearing only a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He held a crystal tumbler filled with a dark, thick crimson liquid. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "Where am I?" Clara whispered, her voice hoarse. "You are in the master suite of my home," Adrian replied, stepping closer. His movements were completely silent, lacking the heavy thud of human footsteps. It was unnerving. "You bled on my doorstep, Clara Hayes. You invoked an old law of sanctuary, and now you belong to the protection of this house." Clara flinched at the sound of her name. "You know who I am. I make it a point to know everything that happens in Chicago," Adrian said, setting his glass on a mahogany side table. He pulled a heavy leather armchair closer to her bed and sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. "But I confess you were a blind spot. Your grandfather did an excellent job of hiding you from the nocturnal world. I assumed the Rousseau bloodline died out in the 1920s during the Prohibition Wars." "Rousseau?" Clara asked, her head spinning. "My grandfather's name was Hayes. Arthur Hayes." "A pseudonym," Adrian corrected gently, though his eyes remained sharp, analyzing her every micro-expression. His real name was Arthur Rousseau. He was a keeper, a human sworn to monitor the fragile treaties between my kind and the hunters. His blood, and by extension, your blood, acts as a biological skeleton key to the ancient wards that protect the vampire territories across the Midwest. Clara stared at him, trying to process the absolute absurdity of his words. Vampires, wards, keepers. But then she remembered Liam's cold, dead eyes as he negotiated her price. She remembered the unnatural speed with which Adrian had caught her at the door. Reality had fractured, and she was falling through the cracks. "Liam!" she choked out, the betrayal crashing over her anew, suffocating her. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "My fiancé. He sold me to them. He said my bloodline was confirmed. He was going to let them kill me." "Not kill you," Adrian said, his tone turning dangerously cold. Not toward her, but toward the thought of the men outside. The St. Jude Syndicate doesn't kill keepers. They drain them, slowly. They would have kept you alive in a subterranean facility, harvesting your blood bag by bag, using it to dissolve the magical barriers protecting my safe houses. Liam Gallagher was never a private equities manager. He is a high-ranking lieutenant in the syndicate. A sob tore from Clara's throat. 3 years. The holidays, the late-night movies, the ring on her finger, all of it was a meticulously crafted lie to get close to her, to monitor her until her bloodline could be verified. She felt incredibly violated, sick to her stomach. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she finally broke down. Suddenly, the mattress dipped. Clara flinched, expecting an attack, but felt a cold, firm hand tentatively touch her shoulder. She looked up through her tears to see Adrian sitting on the edge of the bed. The terrifying ancient predator looked almost uncertain. "I am unaccustomed to human weeping," Adrian said quietly, his brow furrowed slightly. He awkwardly offered her a silk handkerchief from his pocket. "But I can offer you this comfort, Clara. Liam Gallagher's betrayal has sealed his fate. By attacking you in my city, he has broken a 300-year-old treaty. He is a dead man walking." Clara took the handkerchief, wiping her eyes. "Why are you helping me? You're a vampire. You're the king of the Undercity. I'm just a human." "Because you knocked on my door," Adrian said softly, his stormy eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "And because centuries ago, your ancestor saved my life when a hunter's blade was inches from my heart. We honor our debts. But more than that," Adrian paused, his gaze dropping to the steady pulse beating at the base of her throat. Clara tensed, suddenly hyper-aware of the predator sitting inches from her. But Adrian didn't lean in to bite. Instead, he reached up and gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his cold fingers sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "More than that," Adrian murmured, "Liam made a grave tactical error. He drove the only living skeleton key in the Western Hemisphere directly into my arms. You are no longer safe in the human world, Clara. The Syndicate will never stop hunting you. But as long as you remain by my side, behind these walls, nothing will ever hurt you again." Clara looked at the immortal man beside her. She had lost everything tonight. Her home, her future, the man she loved. She was completely alone, thrust into a hidden, violent world she didn't understand. But looking into Adrian's eyes, seeing the absolute, ruthless promise of protection there, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't just a refugee in his home. She was the spark that was about to ignite a supernatural war across the streets of Chicago. And the Vampire King was going to burn the city down to keep her safe. A sudden violent crash echoed from the floor below, followed by the shattering of glass and the distinct, heavy thud of automatic weapons fire. The wards had been breached. Adrian stood up instantly, his demeanor shifting from gentle protector to an apex predator in a fraction of a second. His eyes bled from stormy grey to a glowing, luminescent crimson. The veins under his eyes darkened, and the true, terrifying nature of the Vampire King was revealed. "Stay here," Adrian commanded, his voice a demonic, vibrating snarl that commanded absolute obedience. "Do not open this door for anyone but me." "Adrian," Clara gasped, reaching out. "They have forced their way into my home," Adrian said, turning his back to her, rolling his shoulders as the shadows in the room seemed to bend and twist around him. "It is time I reminded the St. Jude Syndicate why they fear the dark." He vanished from the room with blinding speed, the heavy oak doors locking themselves behind him. Clara was left alone in the silence, listening as the screams began to echo from the floor below. The screams from the ground floor did not last long. Clara huddled against the carved mahogany headboard, the heavy velvet blankets pulled up to her chin, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The thick walls of the manor muffled the worst of the carnage, but they could not drown out the heavy, wet thuds and the terrifying, bone-chilling snapping sounds that echoed up the grand staircase. The gunfire had ceased almost as quickly as it had begun, replaced by a dreadful, oppressive silence that was somehow worse than the noise. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing the palms of her hands against her ears. The scent of ozone and copper drifted beneath the bedroom door, thick and suffocating. She was a woman who had spent her life curating art galleries in the West Loop, organizing charity galas, and worrying about floral arrangements. Now, she was trapped in a fortress of blood, guarded by an immortal predator who was currently slaughtering men in her name. The sheer, absurd terror of her reality threatened to drag her under. Then the heavy brass handle of the bedroom door slowly turned. Clara stopped breathing. She reached blindly for the heavy brass lamp on the bedside table, her fingers curling around the cold metal base. If it was one of the syndicate mercenaries, she would not go down without a fight. The door pushed open, and Adrian stepped into the warm glow of the firelight. Clara dropped the lamp. Adrian was no longer the immaculate, aristocratic billionaire who had offered her a handkerchief. His black dress shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing pale, flawless skin that was rapidly knitting a jagged bullet wound back together. His hands and forearms were coated in crimson, the blood dripping slowly onto the antique Persian rug. His eyes were still glowing, that terrifying, unearthly red, the dark veins pulsing beneath his skin. He looked like a demon, dragged straight from the depths of hell. Yet as his glowing eyes found her trembling form on the bed, the demonic visage softened. The crimson faded slowly back to a stormy grey, and the dark veins receded. He took a ragged breath, pulling a pristine white cloth from his pocket to wipe the gore from his hands. "It is over," Adrian said, his voice a low, rough gravel. "The perimeter is secure. The syndicate operatives who breached the foyer have been dealt with." Clara swallowed hard, her throat raw. "Dealt with?" Adrian did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing to the shadowy hallway behind him. "There is, however, one survivor. I thought you might want the privilege of addressing him before I dispose of the trash." From the darkness of the corridor, two massive figures emerged. They were vampires, Adrian's personal guard, dressed in tactical gear that mirrored the mercenaries. But their movements were fluid and utterly silent. Between them, they dragged a broken, bleeding man and threw him violently onto the floor at the foot of Clara's bed. Clara gasped, pressing her hand over her mouth. It was Liam. Her fiancé looked entirely unrecognizable. His designer suit was shredded, his face bruised and swollen, a deep laceration cutting across his left cheek. He coughed violently, spitting a mixture of blood and saliva onto the rug as he struggled to look up. When his eyes met Clara's, a flicker of something like guilt flashed across his face, but it was quickly swallowed by a desperate, pathetic panic. "Clara," Liam wheezed, reaching a trembling hand toward the bed. "Clara, please, you have to tell them to stop. Tell him to let me go." Clara stared at the man she had loved for 3 years. The man who had bought her favorite peonies every Tuesday, who had held her hand when her grandfather died, who had kissed her forehead just hours before, selling her to a mercenary death squad. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful. Why? The single word tore from her throat, raw and broken. "Why did you do it, Liam? Was it just for the money? Was I just a paycheck to you?" Liam let out a dark, wet chuckle that quickly turned into a groan of pain as one of the guards kicked him in the ribs. "Money? Do you think I need money, Clara? I manage hedge funds worth billions." He looked up, his eyes wide and manic. "I did it for my life." Clara frowned, confusion piercing through her grief. "What are you talking about?" Adrian stepped forward, his cold eyes fixed on Liam. "He has stage 4 pancreatic cancer," the Vampire King stated flatly. "A human diagnosis that is universally fatal. The Syndicate does not just harvest keeper blood to break our wards, Clara. They synthesize it. They use the regenerative properties of the Rousseau bloodline to create experimental therapeutics for high-paying elite clients." Clara felt all the blood drain from her face. She looked at Liam, searching for a denial, but found only grim confirmation. "They promised me the first viable dose," Liam confessed, his voice cracking. "I found out 6 months ago. I was dying, Clara. I am dying. The doctors gave me until Christmas. Then the Syndicate approached me. They knew about your grandfather. They knew what you were. They told me if I delivered you to them, they would cure me. I didn't want to do it. I swear to God I loved you. But I didn't want to die." "So you decided I should die instead," Clara whispered, the absolute betrayal solidifying into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. "You spent the last 6 months planning a wedding, knowing you were going to hand me over to be drained like an animal in a cage." "It's just blood," Liam shouted, desperation making his voice shrill. "You would have survived. They just needed to keep you in the facility. Clara, please. I'm your fiancé. You can't let this monster kill me." Clara looked from Liam's pathetic, groveling form to Adrian. The Vampire King stood perfectly still, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. He was waiting. He was giving her the power to decide. In that moment, the Clara Hayes who worried about gallery openings and floral arrangements died. She looked down at the bleeding wound on her ribs, a physical reminder of the man who had ordered her extraction. She looked at the ring on her left hand, a diamond paid for by the man who had sold her soul. Slowly, deliberately, Clara reached down and pulled the diamond engagement ring off her finger. She tossed it onto the floor. It rolled across the blood-stained rug and came to a stop inches from Liam's trembling hand. "I don't know you," Clara said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. Her eyes were as cold as the rain outside. "And you are not my fiancé." She looked up at Adrian. "Get him out of my sight." Liam screamed as the two vampire guards hauled him to his feet, dragging him backward into the dark corridor. "Clara! No, you can't do this, Clara!" His screams faded as the heavy bedroom doors slammed shut, sealing the room once again. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Adrian remained standing by the door for a long moment, watching Clara intently. "You showed remarkable strength," he finally said, his voice soft, shedding the gravelly edge of the predator. "Most humans would have forgiven him. The heart is a foolish, fragile thing." "My heart is broken," Clara replied, her voice trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade. "But it is not foolish." Adrian walked slowly toward the bed. He sat on the edge, the mattress dipping under his weight. He reached out, and this time Clara did not flinch as his cold, strong fingers gently wiped a stray tear from her cheek. "The Syndicate knows you are here," Adrian said, his tone turning serious, authoritative. "Liam's strike team failed, but they transmitted their location before the wards jammed their signals. By morning, the director of the Syndicate will rally a small army. They will bring heavy artillery, sunfire incendiaries, and weapons designed specifically to kill my kind. This townhouse is a fortress, but it cannot withstand a siege of that magnitude." Clara felt a new wave of panic rise in her chest. "Then what do we do? Where can we go?" "I own an estate in the Scottish Highlands," Adrian explained. "It is an ancestral stronghold, protected by ancient magic that modern Syndicate technology cannot penetrate. My private jet is waiting at O'Hare. But we have a problem." Adrian's eyes dropped to the bandage on Clara's side. "You lost too much blood before you reached my door. You are stable now, but the atmospheric pressure of a transatlantic flight will cause your stitched wound to rupture. Your human body will go into shock at 30,000 feet, and my doctors will not be able to save you." Clara swallowed hard. "Then I'm a dead woman either way. If I stay, the Syndicate takes me. If I fly, I bleed out." "There is a third option," Adrian murmured, leaning closer. The intoxicating scent of cedar and ozone enveloped her. "But it is not a choice I can make for you. It requires your absolute, willing consent." Clara met his gaze. "Tell me." "I must share my blood with you," Adrian said quietly. "A true blood exchange. If you drink from me, the immortal properties of my blood will accelerate your cellular regeneration. Your wound will heal in minutes. You will be strong enough to survive the flight, and strong enough to outrun anything the Syndicate sends after us." Clara hesitated. "If I drink your blood, will I turn into a vampire?" "No," Adrian assured her. "Transformation requires a full draining of your human life force before the introduction of immortal blood. This is simply a bond. But I will not lie to you, Clara. A blood exchange is intimate. It will bind us. You will feel my presence in your mind, and I will feel yours. It will mark you as under my eternal protection. To the supernatural world, you will not just be a keeper. You will be the king's consort." Clara looked into Adrian's ancient, stormy eyes. She saw the centuries of violence, the ruthless power of a predator who ruled the shadows. But she also saw something else. She saw the fierce, unyielding need to protect her. He had slaughtered an armed strike team for her. He was offering to abandon his city and cross an ocean just to keep her safe. Liam, a human, had sold her for his own life. Adrian, a monster, was willing to risk his life for hers. "Do it," Clara whispered, her voice steady and resolute. Adrian's expression softened into something resembling reverence. He raised his right wrist to his mouth, his elongated canines extending seamlessly. With a swift, brutal motion, he bit into his own flesh. Dark, crimson blood, thicker and more vibrant than human blood, welled from the puncture wounds. He offered his wrist to her lips. "Drink, Clara, and leave your mortal fears behind." Clara closed her eyes, leaned forward, and pressed her lips to his cold skin. As she swallowed the first drop of the Vampire King's blood, the world exploded into agonizing, brilliant light. It tasted like burning copper and aged wine. The liquid fire raced down her throat, instantly incinerating the deep, aching pain in her ribs. She gasped against his wrist as a surge of impossible electric energy flooded her veins. Her heart hammered a frantic, thunderous rhythm, syncing perfectly with the slow, powerful thud of Adrian's immortal heart. Visions flashed through her mind. Centuries of war, moonlit hunts across snow-covered forests, the crushing weight of an immortal crown. But beneath it all, there was a profound, overwhelming sense of safety. A warm, enveloping darkness that promised to shield her from the world. When Clara finally pulled away, gasping for air, her vision was impossibly sharp. The dull ache in her side was completely gone. She looked down and saw that the edges of her bandage were loose. Beneath it, the jagged knife wound had closed entirely, leaving only a faint silver scar. She looked up at Adrian. His stormy eyes were blown wide, pupils dilated, staring at her with a mixture of awe and fierce possessiveness. The bond was complete. She could feel his quiet strength echoing in the back of her own mind. "It is done," Adrian murmured, his voice a velvet caress. He stood up, offering his hand to her. "Are you ready to leave Chicago, my queen?" Clara placed her hand in his. The coldness of his skin was no longer terrifying. It felt like coming home. She swung her legs off the bed, standing firmly on the antique rug. She was no longer Clara Hayes, the naive gallery curator. She was the keeper of the Rousseau line, bound to the king of the Undercity. "Let them come," Clara said, a dangerous, beautiful smirk playing on her lips. "We have a flight to catch." Adrian smiled, a sharp, lethal expression that promised violence to anyone who dared to follow them. Together, they walked out of the master suite and descended the grand staircase, stepping over the ruined remnants of the past and walking out the mahogany door into the stormy, unforgiving night. Thank you for tuning in to the epic conclusion of Clara and Adrian's dark journey. If you loved this dramatic, twist-filled vampire romance and want to see more real-life-inspired paranormal stories, you know what to do. Smash that like button. Share this video with your friends who love a good betrayal and revenge plot, and absolutely hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on our upcoming premium audio stories. What was your favorite twist in the story? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. See you in the next one.